Well, hello there, and welcome to another edition of Warbird Wednesday. My name is Fred Bell. I'm the Vice Chairman of the Palm Springs Air Museum, and today we're going to do something a little bit different. We've been talking about exhibit aircraft here at the museum, and we're going to go off into some of the German, what I would call highly engineered aircraft. And in this case, there is only one surviving example of this airplane. In many cases, there are none, but in the case of the airplane I'm going to talk about today, there is only one surviving aircraft anywhere in the world. So we're going to talk about that, and we are going to go into the Junkers, the Ju-388 today. But first, with my ultra crepidation assistant, Greg, looking very happy. I actually got that, Greg. I got it. He's coiffed me in a bowling pin hat. I do not understand the significance, but the drink today, Greg, you're actually doing some theming. We're going to talk about that. He's back to his theme, poisoning of me. So I'm going to go ahead and take this off, and I'm going to toss it off camera. I hit him right square in the noggin with that one. Good job, good catch, Greg. That one actually I could get a little force behind it. So the 388, the Junkers 388, which is this aircraft here, was based on the Ju-88 design. Now, the Germans prior to, I'm going to lift this off its pedestal. I'm going to go ahead and give you a plan view of the aircraft. Twin engine, typically crew of 3, crew complement might change. An aircraft that could fly in the range of about anywhere from about 275 to middle 300 mile an hour range, because there are variants of this aircraft. It was designed primarily, and this was in the German concept of blitzkrieg, aircraft were really designed to be close air support aircraft. In other words, the Germans, they had developed the concept of blitzkrieg, which was lightning war. And the idea about aircraft is aircraft became directed artillery and aerial artillery. The most classic example of this was the Stuka, the Ju-87. The Ju-88 and some of the other aircraft, they could carry bombs, they could do point direct attacks. You had the Henkel, you had the 111, which was about as far, you did have the Condor, which is a bigger airplane, but the 111 and the 88s to the Ju-88s were essentially medium bombers, but that's about in any great numbers as far as the Germans went. Now, they were what I talk about directed aerial artillery. The idea behind them was they could go to the point where the Germans were going to try to break through, because lightning war was the Germans would hit one point in the line with their mechanized infantry, and then they would fan out behind the enemy and not allow the enemy to recover. They'd get into the rear areas. They did this very effectively early in World War II. And although we're not a war museum per se, we're talking about a ground war, but the blitzkrieg worked really well, and this air-ground combination in tandem with close air support was extremely helpful. Now, there were some axioms with close air support, and that was you had to have air superiority. So the Germans, they outmatched all of the European Army air forces. The French had some really good fighters, and the British had some really good fighters. The Russians, the Finns, everybody else that came up, they had some good aircraft, but not in any real numbers. And what the Germans would do is overwhelm the air force that they were attacking, and then these aircraft would come out and be deployed to take on this task of close air support. Now, one of the things that with close air support, not only did you have to have a good fighter cover, these aircraft did not have tremendous range. They were not strategic bombing airplanes. And so with a short range or short legs, relatively a medium bomb load, they were fast. They were pretty fast for their type, but they were not what we call like an American, a B-17, we're going to talk a little bit about the B-29. They were not tremendously efficient as strategic bombers. So, and when I mean strategic bombers, we're getting up into, you want to destroy the ability of the enemy to make war. So you're attacking factories way behind the line, and things of that nature, trying to disrupt or you're attacking the population, and you're trying to disrupt the populace behind the line supporting the war effort. Now, somebody I know online is going to say, well, what about the Battle of Britain? Okay, we can talk about the Battle of Britain, but that exactly is what I'm talking about. The Me-109s were at the Messerschmitts, and their fighter cover primarily was at the end of its ability to support the bomber aircraft, and the bomber aircraft were fairly lightly armed, and with the British directing their resources, the German aircraft did not fare well in that scenario. Now, in the comment section, you can argue with me about why the Germans were not successful in the Battle of Britain, but that's my thumbnail sketch. Was, in other words, these aircraft, the German bomber aircraft, were being used outside of the role that they were designed for, and they were not good at strategic bombing. So these aircraft also had another use, and that was as the British and then the Americans started attacking German population centers and strategic bombing, they became, as I've talked about it before, but the Germans had this view of these twin-engine aircraft as bomber destroyers. And I believe the German term, and I'm going to probably mispronounce this, is Zorster. This was the Stortebreaker, the A33, which was actually named after a group of privateers, German medieval privateers. It was an interesting name for an airplane. But these aircraft became more heavily armed.
Early footage shows an 88's crew preparing their guns before setting out on a bombing mission. The machine guns are 7.92mm MG-15s, made by Rheinmetall Borsig, a company that produced much of the Reich's weaponry during the war. Often simple in design and manufacture, but extremely well made, they were symbols of the German tradition of excellence in engineering. The guns were light, easy to handle, and installed with very little effort. Each piece was mounted on a swivel joint, fixed to the fuselage. It was an extremely manageable arrangement, and with the MG-15's reliability in action, it proved itself savagely efficient against Allied fighters.
And they were used quite extensively. The Germans had figured out how to miniaturize aerial radar so they could be used as night fighters, and they could get up into those bomber streams, and they would really play hell with British bomber streams, because the British were area bombardment at night. And they were used to some extent early in the war attacking American heavy bomber formations, although once the Americans figured out how to field effective fighter cover, these aircraft were no longer very viable. They were much more viable in a night fighter role. And I'm talking about the Me-110 and the Bf-110, Me-110, that series beyond that, the Ju-88. There were a whole series of German night fighters that were based on that bomber-destroyer concept. Now, the Germans got something pretty much of a scare, and German intelligence started picking up that the Americans, they were, at this point, you got to remember, the bomber streams, the heavy bomber streams that were attacking targets in Europe, German targets in Europe, were just continuing to grow in strength. And they were having a lot of trouble, let's say in 1943, countering these American bomber streams. Now, they got a scare, and that was intentional by the Americans, that they were going to be fielding a new high-altitude bomber. And this bomber would fly at altitudes that would make all of the German fighters at that time completely ineffective. So we're talking now in the 1943 range, And the Germans, remember, in production, when you're dealing with production, you can't build an airplane and test it and everything in 3 months. I mean, the Americans did some of this in a year, like with the Hellcat. They turned the entire design around in a year, but you need at least 12 months to be able to field a new design. So the Germans heard about, which is apropos, the B-29, which is actually just above my head. And the Germans believed, and the Americans fostered this by deploying B-29s later, prototype B-29s in Europe, that they were going to be bringing the B-29 to the European theater of operations. So what did the Germans do? The Germans got at it, and they took the Ju-88. This in my hand is an A model, but they took the Ju-88, they upgunned the engines, they created a bigger engine, it changed the way that it was aspirated, how it took in air. They made bigger wings, and they upgunned the airplane up into this Ju-83-88. Now, this aircraft, the 388, had a pressurized cabin, if you can believe it. It had a crew of 3. It was designed to operate at altitudes of about 43,000, 45,000 feet. It could operate in very, very high altitudes. It was also fast. This aircraft maximum speed was 383 miles per hour. You can believe that. So it was very fast. It had a cruise speed of 340 in response to the B-29, because they thought the B-29 was going to be pressurized and fast. And they knew, okay, we don't have anything in the inventory. So not only did they develop the 388, now Greg is going to love me for this, because you're going to deal with this in post, Greg. Aren't you having fun with this? They developed the TA-152, the Focke-Wulf 152. We've talked about the 152 before and its relationship to the F-8F, the Bearcat, and you can go back to the Bearcat video and talk about that. I actually really, from a design standpoint, really like the TA-152. They developed the ME-155B, which was essentially a long-winged 109, bigger wings, because thinner altitudes, you got to have these big wings. They developed the Dornier, the 335, the Arrow, the push-pull Arrow. So nothing really worked very well, but the 388 actually came into its own, and they went, okay, this is going to work. Now, why would you do that? Would you base this design off of Ju-88? One reason: tooling. And people say, well, what does that mean? Whenever you build something, and you build an airplane, or you build a car, or you build everything, if in your car you go out and you look up whatever your car you have, and you look for a part, and you say, and the part fits like 10 years or 3 years or 5 years, that's because the manufacturer has updated certain portions of the design, but they haven't upgraded all the tooling, and that has to do with manufacturing. And the idea behind that is they knew they had a proven design that worked. The issue was, could they make the changes with the wings and alter the aircraft to where they didn't have to change too much tooling on the production line to get the airplane out in a shorter period of time. So that happened a lot, especially with the Germans later in the war. The 109 is a great example of that, as they went through various types. I would argue the 109 was produced way past its useful life in context of the opponents with the P-47 or the P-51. But the reality was they already had the tooling, and if they could alter the airframe and the engine and not have to change the tooling, they could still produce them. And it was easy to produce them. The 388, the Ju-388, was no different than that. The aircraft flew, the prototype flew, Greg, in December of 1943. So it was already flying at that time, and that gives you an idea of how fast the Germans reacted to this. They had a lot of teething problems with the aircraft, with the engines, and so on and so forth. There was only, out to the end of the war, they only made 100 of these. And the only version that really saw any action and any use in any numbers was the reconnaissance version, which I believe was the L model. And that was the reason that the reason that it saw so much action was what had happened to the Germans, Greg. The Germans, I'm going to go ahead and put this back as I'm explaining this. The Germans, because they had lost air superiority, had pretty much lost any ability to have aerial reconnaissance, if you think about that, because they'd fall victim to fighter sweeps. So when they had these high altitude airplanes, guess what? The American airplanes can't get up there either, or they're so fast up there that by the time the American airplane gets up there and is fluttering around, they're long gone and they've done what they needed to do. So the reconnaissance version of this airplane was the most produced aircraft at that time. Now, I want to go ahead and move into my stage 2. And Greg has really, I don't even know how you did this. This is Africola. Africa Cola. I'm sure that's what it is. If you look at from the Africa Corps, if you look at the palm tree and you look at the placement of the logo, this looks like an Africa Corps logo. So Greg, you have gone all out with the Germans here. This is a German product. Let's see. There is no, wow, the Germans don't care about any ingredients in here. So, but Greg, this is really, I love the bottle, but this is clever. Africola. Very clever, Greg. All right, I'm going to go ahead and take a sip. It's not as rancid as the stuff, oh, the finish on it is a little, this may have been on the shelf a little bit too much. It's not as terrible as the buffalo wing stuff you gave me, but it's not my cup of tea. Very caffeine-y. The second swig. Now, who are we going to salute today? They were our adversaries, and the Germans did terrible things. There's no question. But their pilots in combat pretty much flew till they died. And so from a standpoint of all of the German pilots during the war, we do have to literally recognize that not only that, but, and we're going to talk about the German designers, Werner von Braun, a lot of these folks moved over from Germany. We would not have some of the technical innovations that we have if we didn't have the Germans. So today, with Africa, I'm going to do a third one. I want to salute all of the technical innovations of the German people. Because in a lot of cases, we wouldn't have been able to do some of the things we did without that. But that is not to say that the Germans didn't need to be defeated, because they did, and we're very lucky they were. But I'm not going to have any more Africola. Now, this particular aircraft, the 388, there was one captured, was an L model. It was work number 560049. It was captured. Work number, by the way, is like the manufacturing number, like what we use. It was captured by Watson's Whizzers at the end of the war, which we were just talking about, which ties back to my combination, or my comments, that at the end of the war, the United States and the Russians were doing everything they could think of to get a hold of German technology, because the Germans had all that rocket technology. They had a whole bunch of innovative. They were the first to field an operational jet fighter. There were a number of things that the Germans had fielded that if the Allies, and you've got to remember the Cold War was heating up, if either side could capture that technology and use it, they would have the high ground against the other. And what are we talking about? We're talking about the Soviet Union, and we're talking about the United States and its allies. And at that time, we were looking at the onset of the Cold War. Although nobody said it, they realized that we had defeated the Axis powers, that Germany and Japan were going to be defeated, and the new challenge was on the horizon, and that horizon was going to be the Cold War. So we were grabbing up as much German technology as we could. Operation Lusty was one of those pieces. The 388 was brought back to the United States. It was, believe it or not, one of the, I've always been critical of the fact that the armed forces didn't keep enough of this technology. The Imperial War Museum, Great Britain, and the British are probably, and I've said it before, were always the best at this. They would bring stuff back and then they would finish with it and they'd put it in a museum. The United States, not so much, but they did bring a 388 back. They flight tested it, and when they were done flight testing it in 1949, they donated it to the Smithsonian Institution. It is still in their storage facility. My understanding is that it is in very, very good shape because it's been stored indoors since it was donated to the Smithsonian. So at some point, hopefully, we'll see the 388 reassembled so we can get an idea of what it actually looked like. But there is only one of these left in the world, and it is in that collection. Now, there's no secret that, and I've talked about it before, to round out our collection, we are chasing some Axis airplanes. We want to have some Axis aircraft, so we're going to continue to try to do that. And one reason is just to have some engineering examples, especially to put them up against some of the American aircraft, the contemporary American aircraft that we have in the collection now. But if you want to fight World War II for yourself, you can go out and have World War II Monopoly. So you can call up Jason. I have collect a salary as you pass. So I guess you collect bucks and you basically buy historical events in World War II. I can see the Red Ball Express is on there, the home front. This is something you should have. Redo World War II with your friends. Call Jason or hit the link and you can get one of these Monopoly games. They're just very cool, and you can refight World War II in a Monopoly game. Greg, who knew? Who knew? So get out to Jason and hit a link. Now, we cannot do the work that we do without your donation. If you can go out there and hit that donation button, we can use the donation. We've got a lot of really cool airplanes coming out of our restoration facility. We're just in the process of finishing up that A7, which we've talked about in a previous episode. That is going to get dedicated here this coming November, and that'll join our collection. We've got more aircraft going into the restoration facility. Of course, the F-117 is also part of that. We're continuing to work on that. If we earned your subscription today, hopefully you will subscribe. Hopefully you like what we have to talk about, and you will hit that subscription button. Tickle the little bell for a notification every time we put up a video. You can like us on Facebook. My name is Fred Bell. I am the Vice Chairman of the Palm Springs Air Museum. Thanks so much for joining us. Have a great day.
Ich scrolle nicht, und wenn das Herz auch bricht, ewig verlorenes Lieb, ewig verlorenes Lieb, ich scrolle nicht, ich scrolle nicht, wie du auch strahlst in Diamantenpracht, es fällt kein Strahl in deines Herzens Nacht, das weiß ich längst. Ich scrolle nicht, und wenn das Herz auch bricht, ich sah dich ja im Traume und sah die Nacht in deines Herzens Raume und sah die Schlange, die dir am Herzen frisst. Ich sah mein Lieb, wie sehr du elend bist. Ich scrolle nicht, ich scrolle nicht.